I'm one of the co-founders of Quilt.AI. My other co-founder, Anurag, is sitting at the back there. Say hello. And we are what we like to think of ourselves as the fast and scalable alternative to research, particularly qualitative, ethnographic, and semiotic research. And we try and convert the large volume of data signals that are being generated any day from Twitter, search, and all sorts of other platforms into something meaningful and actionable. At that volume of data, of course, human brains cannot compute it, so we've also built out some AI models that make sense of it. Now, talk is cheap, so what we're going to do is two things. We're going to take you through some cases, show you some videos, but we also have some live demos active outside, so you should walk up, have an AI look at your face and your clothing, and make a fairly interesting subcultural or personality deduction about you. So, having said that, let us begin. Trying to show you so the video we would okay, he's going to try again. There you go. Just play it from there. So the question I want to ask all of you is, who is this young girl? It's a video we found on Instagram a while ago, but it would be useful if I could get maybe 3 people's opinions on who she is. So I don't have a ball to throw around, so I'll just randomly point in a general direction. What does that table think? What about you? Anyone?
No idea which is, but it's a bit.
I have no idea, but it's just like, just a little girl.
It's in zes. Got no clue. That's very, no clue.
Does anybody have a clue? That gentleman at the back there. Very good answer. Does anybody else have a clue?
Anybody?
What about you? Okay, a room full of qualitative researchers and no one has any ideas. All right, so I'm not going to even play this game, but fundamentally what we found is a lot of people say she's a father's daughter, they're gun nuts, this is not a very healthy situation for a child to be brought up in, etc., etc. And one of the things we've noticed, and especially both in academia and old school qualitative and ethnographic research, is that often when we look at information, what we find the loudest is our own assumptions being reflected back at us. So it's like, oh, white nationalist, gun nut, etc. And in many ways, that's how we take that little girl's information and put it in a little box and put it away forever. So let me tell you about the story of Quilt. Oh, is there a... let me tell you the story of Quilt. We all know that the world is fragmented and torn apart. We've seen this in multiple election campaigns. We've seen this in the rise of populism across the world. And in 2018, we started a project that would use technology not to tear the world apart, but to somehow stitch it back together, to allow people to not box other people into neat little categories, and to extract something meaningful and powerful from their story. We're reaching the end of the first phase of that 2-year project. I know we're not very chatty here, so I'm going to show another set of images. And the context of this, and this is where it all began, was we were approached by someone in the United States who said, look, we don't understand our country anymore. The election has just taken place. I don't understand my neighbor, I don't understand my friends, families are no longer speaking to each other, communities are getting torn apart, and there's a very polarized environment happening. So why don't you see what your technology, and this is before it was the state it is in now, why don't you see what your technology and techniques can do for us? So we were given a problem, which was inner city violence in I think it was Chicago, and we were told to find multiple communities and groups that were on the edge and doing certain things. So as you can see, this is a sampling of the hundreds of accounts that we pulled out. And the first procedure that we ran was to group these people based on what they claimed about themselves, how they self-identified, the stories they told us about themselves. And immediately we got 4 distinct types of groups. The first one was, of course, what is known as white nationalists. So these were individuals who were uploading photographs and saying, white power, we must secure the future for white children, we're on the edge of a potential civil war. And you can see there was some fading in and out of the white nationalist group with both police and army, but nothing that's significant. The second set we found was, of course, inner city gangs, both racial and non-racial. And there was a deep and profound set of unease when we found these accounts because violence was being spoken about fairly explicitly. There were guns being showcased. It was fairly brutal. And the third set, of course, was police officers, people who are asked to uphold the law. Some of them had trickled down from gangs, some of them had trickled from the white nationalist group. Now, this is based on grouping people based on what they say. And this is one of the reasons why we believe that the world is actually becoming fragmented. Because people's claims and self-identities of who they are often the easiest and most tribal versions of them. We did another layer on this and said, let's group these individuals not via what they say, but by who they are, what they mean, what their cultures are, what their psychologies are, and what their value systems are. And immediately the grouping changed. As you can see, different types of formations are emerging. And once again, I would urge you to see our demo outside to get a sense of how this works. And what we found was 4 or 5 unique value systems that ran across extremely disparate groups. Self-reliance and self-improvement, which we all know are fairly well-rooted American values. You know, you would get that in your cultural coding and semiotics work. Then moral and amoral pedagogy, which is essentially saying, I want to teach my child what it means to be a good person, as well as I want to teach my child how to survive in a rough and cruel world. So, and the third set was this construction of a tribe, not via standard caste, gender, location, and urban identities, but via memories, via experiences, via death, via certain events that have happened. And the moment you see something like this, you can, see cinema of America leveraging some of these themes. You can see TV shows leveraging some of these themes. And certainly, there is some amount of deeply profound truth taking place when you do something like this. So what we have found in the course of the 2 years of working and building our stack and our technology is that the world actually has a lot more in common than we thought. And this commonality is unexpected, yet deeply truthful. So if the world has so much in common, and you can extract that by using models, and you can extract that by looking at the public data, let us see how much we can actually know. And this is going to be a little bit of a perspective shift for qual and quant people who are used to sample sizes of 30, 40, 1,000, if the brand manager is feeling rich. But fundamentally, there is a certain constraint in how much information you ingest when you come up with what you call an insight. And let's see how the world is changing. I know when we showed the child's video, everyone said, I don't know. But this time, I'm going to show you a 4-minute video, and it would be really helpful if you could take notes of the interesting things that you saw when you saw the video. There is no sound, and it would be great if you could just skip ahead instead of skipping back again. So I'll just tell you where to skip ahead, please, on the video. So just go back to the video, go forward, forward, a little back to where you were earlier, a little, that's forward, back, back, back. Just stop there. Put it on full screen, please. Put it on full screen and just let it play and don't interrupt it. Thank you. So that was a very noisy experience because we wanted to show you both the volume of cultural uploads. Those were all done in the last couple of days with a little bit of a statistical insight on the side. We've tried to give you videos from multiple continents and span a life, which is birth, death, first steps, going to school, falling in love, teenage pregnancy, graduating, first job, having a baby, getting married, grandparents, etc. And this is just the start of the internet. And this sort of creation and construction of information about lives is just beginning. It is not slowing down. And it actually represents the largest opportunity for any researcher who actually enjoys human stories. So what can we actually tell about humans without speaking with them when you look at information like this? I hope you don't mind, but we took a random sampling of some of the individuals who were in the audience, and we ran them through a very simple model, just to give you a sense of how this works. So these were pulled out based on, we had a list of participants, and we just skipped through every couple and pulled out their profile photos from LinkedIn and send them through a demographic model and a cultural model. So the demographic and standard object detection model that you're familiar with, that is provided by Google, IBM Watson, Microsoft Azure, and all the various providers, will tell you the following. And this is also us like writing it a little bit. It'll tell you, oh, there's one set of professional headshots featuring men and women. There's some casual black and white shots, and there's some casual exploratory out-of-home shots, which is truthful, right? There's no lie in this, but there's no magic either. Then what we did is we did a slightly deeper layering, which is we looked at the visual texture of the images and used that visual texture to discern what aesthetic forms that person is referencing. So it's like semiotics, but it's not really, because the machine is doing it. Fundamentally takes a photo and says, this individual, the logic and the motivation and the impulses that brought that profile photo to life have actually come from athleisure, grime, punk, ska, etc. And we got a few groupings. So that first grouping with the first two images on the top left are relaxed, confident, unpretentious, urban, multicultural, rebellious, and you can see there are about 6 or 7 groupings that have happened here. Then we zoomed out and said, all right, thank you for that. What subcultures and what formations of aesthetics did the machine arrive at, did the machine reference when it used these groupings? And it came up with 4. Top left, of course, is hipsters, which is interesting, out-of-home aesthetics, a little bit of unshaven, primal and raw energies. Of course, it sort of fades into what we call tech bros. So tech bros are corporate, but with a little bit of, well, I don't need to say that. Then we had X-Punk, which we found very interesting because the ladies on the right were sort of leveraging on those, and we looked at some of the training data and we realized it's because of the dramatic contrast and the bold colors being used in the lipstick and the accessories. And we saw filterers. And filterers was actually referenced a subculture on the internet called e-girls, which is essentially young ladies who are professional Instagrammers and TikTok stars. So suddenly, like all of us, all in our little tables, have become synthesized and integrated into some form of truth. It's unexpected, it's fun, it's playful, and it unlocks something that we can do something magical with. So what can we, so that's all the fun stuff, so let's get into some of the case studies. So what can we do with this methodology when we deploy it at scale? So Quilt.AI does 3 distinct things. It helps a brand, a client, a category, or an industry answer, how do I grow and survive? So I'm losing users, there's some random disruptions happening in the marketplace, how do I manage and sort of deal with this future? The second set of questions is, and it's a question everybody has, how do we differentiate from the category and competition? And the third is, how do we better engage with our current or future customers? And you will know that this is fundamentally the core DNA of any market research or insights outfit. And whether you do semiotics or ethnography or ad evaluation or triggers and barriers or category trends, whether you do it in qualitative ways or quantitative ways, these are the 3 questions that matter most to the person who is buying your data. We stopped counting at 1.5 billion, so this has gone a little further than we started. I'm going to skip this and now get into how we answer those questions. I will take a minute here to walk through the technology process that is employed in answering many of these questions, and maybe use as a reference focus groups and qualitative research, because that might be the easiest reference point. Your first input structure is what you would call a recruitment and fieldwork and a study design. And fundamentally, in an offline model, you would say, I want to study 18 to 25-year-old women in Singapore who are SECA and have used Pond's soap in the last 1 year and are thinking about lapsing. So that's almost like an audience definition. And then you would send out a recruiter to find those individuals and convince them to come into a room to give an interview or to answer a questionnaire. That, as you can imagine, is far more challenging in the internet world, because there are multiple data sets on which a consumer lives. There's Twitter, there's Facebook, there's Instagram, there's Google, there's TikTok, there's Weibo, there's Baidu, there's VK, there's Yandex, there's Naver. This just goes on. And all of those data sets have different access logics. Some will provide you data via an API. Some will provide you data via their ad platforms. Some will not provide you data. Some will provide you data for 1 week and then randomly shut things down, like Facebook and Instagram. So it's a bit of a dynamic and dramatic space. Some you will have to buy via bidding, which is what we do on search. However, all of this information has to be linked and backward integrated into the Pond's consumer or the 18 to 25-year-old living in a certain marketplace. And not all data sets have that. So when you buy data from a social media agency, or if you access data via the Twitter API, I'm saying Twitter because Martin is sitting in front of me, you know that there's a certain cleanness to the data. You get location, you get tweet, etc. But there are certain dimensions that you do not get. You don't know whether a person is a Pond's user or an 18-year-old girl. When you get data from Instagram, you get a photograph, but very little else. So how do you convert this data into something that you can link to a target audience that you want? And that's where a lot of the AI comes in. We've shown you fun stuff like, oh, you're a hipster or a tech bro, or this person's a nationalist or not. But there's a much more basic process that the models can follow, which is based on how I speak, for example, or based on how he speaks, we can discern education, we can discern financial status, we can discern age, demographics, gender. And all of these vary by country. So the way an 18-year-old in Mumbai speaks is very different to how an 18-year-old in Tokyo speaks, and is very different to how an 18-year-old in Shanghai speaks. And you have to train models to recognize and cluster and probabilistically fit speech patterns and photo uploads into those demographic segments. So once you learn how to do that, you immediately turn all of your social media noise, all of your search engine information, all of your Amazon reviews, etc., into a human data stream. It's got people, it's got faces, it's got locations, it's got psychologies, it's got SEC, and that allows you to answer all of these business questions. Triggers and barriers, not a problem. Brand equity, not a problem. Brand imagery, not a problem. And that is the architecture and the structure of our IP. Quilt tries to answer 3 distinct types of questions, and I am going to just walk you through these very quickly. The first thing I'm going to do, because again, there's a little bit of a category shift when you do research of this style, is give you a little lead-in into how it is historically done and what we believe are the problems and the biases and the limitations of that method, and then scale it up to show you how we do it. So let's look at culture. Forget the slide for a second, but just, this is a little bit of a wordy note I've written, but meaning and the analysis of meaning and the extraction of meaning, independently of how you research it, is what? Meaning is the aggregation of historical patterns, oral traditions, and it persists in some shape or form in the modern world through various mutations. And a key part of understanding meaning and discerning meaning as a marketer or a brand strategist is to peer inside a phenomenon such as Billie Eilish or BTS, and to discern the impulses that are hidden within. So Billie Eilish is the sort of rebellious child, is what I picked up from the previous presentation, and BTS is almost like a sort of evangelical purity church play. But all of these insights are unstated. You are dependent on the skills and the experience of the researcher. You're dependent on the cultural background of the researcher, and you're dependent on the language mastery of the researcher. So it's fundamentally not scalable, and it's fundamentally human and anchored into one individual and their mastery. Now, I'm sure all of you have noticed that when people evaluate a research report that is oriented around meaning or semiotics, they will always say that was tremendous storytelling. And the reason storytelling is so important is because it's the easiest way to deliver a compelling story about meaning. And many of our best researchers are storytellers. That's where we're at today. But if you go back 50 years, 100 years, 200 years, maybe even 700 years, and look at the history of human research, whether it's modern anthropology or pre-modern exploratory journaling, most of these documents are completely unreadable. You have to extract the story from the heart of these documents. So one of the cautions I would leave everyone with is just because the story is good and understandable does not mean it is truthful. So how do you do meaning extraction in a computational way? This was a fun project we did for a category that delivers beauty benefits. And the beauty benefit, because we are in Asia, is fairness. And they have thousands of focus groups that have discussed fairness with their brand managers. And every woman in that focus group has said, I want to be fair. And the brand manager has said, what does fairness mean? Oh, white. And the whole industry is based in some shape or form around that architecture. So we said, okay, I don't know any young Indian girl or any young Thai girl who wants to look ghostly white. Perhaps I'm not meeting the right people. Why don't we dig into this a little bit? We extracted about 200,000, these were the old days, selfies by women. And the way we manage them is, let's say you are one of my consumers and this one is another one of my consumers. We extracted your most popular selfie and your least popular selfie. Because we all know the internet is fundamentally a libidinal system where your likes are training you into what is good. So if I like something you've said, you'll be like, oh, you know, I should keep doing something like that. So we extracted the most popular and the least popular selfie within like a 2-month horizon at scale. And we pulled out the cheek using standard object recognition and did a hex color value on that. And what that gave us is a database and a shade card of the most popular skin tones in the most popular selfies, and a database shade card of the most unpopular skin tones in the most unpopular selfies. And we asked the machine to find the culture in it, because getting the data is easy, finding the culture is harder. And the way we did this is saying, we know that beauty is often referenced to nature and biology in all of the narratives that we've seen. So let's do a reverse lookup to see where these types of colors appear in both nature and biology. And immediately got two polarities. We got decay, which is dead things, rotting wood, corpses, aging, a certain sense of slowing down of life. And you got vitality, roses blooming, peaches, fresh fruit, people jogging, gym photographs, etc. Now, to be completely honest, decay and vitality were names the researchers gave, but the clustering was machinic. So that was the first axis. The second axis we saw was low saturation and high saturation. I did not know what low saturation meant until I did this, but low saturation is the intensity, the lack of intensity and the purity of a color inside an image. And this is how the matrix developed. All of the ads and promises of fairness creams are in the top left corner, which is low saturation and decay. And those are, interestingly, the sort of least popular colors in a woman's life. Colors of vitality, high saturation, some of the more progressive brands are moving in that space because you can't show white, so you might as well show rosy, and it's a good solution. But even those were unliked color tones. What we found remarkable was vitality and low saturation were universally, in both countries, the most popular skin tones that we saw. And here's the rub. No woman in any focus group is going to say, yes, I like fairness, but I like low saturated pinks. It's a very hard thing to say, but machinically, it's a very simple insight. The next set of things I want to share with you is category. Now, category insight is again based on conversation. And let's look at historically how category work has been done. Category work is essentially a problem of speech and conversation. We ask a question, what do you think about social media? What do you think about fairness? What do you think about my brand? What do you think about this politician? And we get a series of obvious answers. Then, because we're proper researchers, we do what is called probing and laddering. So, you know, I really don't like Trump. Why don't you like Trump? Oh, because he's rude. What is the problem with being rude? Oh, you know, it's not the way of doing things. Why is doing the right thing important to you, etc., etc. And we get a really big insight on the back of that. And when that method fails, we flip it and sell ethnography, which is essentially the truth about your category exists in a culture, in a lived reality. So let's immerse in that culture and that lived reality and see how it plays itself out. And we resolve those insights into a category insight and a category truth. And again, it's dependent on the expertise of the researcher, the quality of the data that you're extracting, the quality of the respondent that you have met, the smartness of the study design. We all know the problems. What if we could remove all of that? I want to spend a second on this particular slide and then take you into a longer video. This slide, there was a client who had an ad for an electric vehicle that they had made in the US and had performed off the charts, and they wanted to release in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And at its surface, it's not a complicated ad. It's fundamentally a young man, very handsome, wearing a suit, coming out of an office, big glass buildings behind him, puts his jacket on his shoulder, gets into this car, drives into the nature, and it's completely silent because it's supposed to signify quiet, no engine, electric car, right? What we found amazing was in the US, our AI said, oh, this is freedom, and it's sort of referencing horses through the wilderness, all of that sort of imagery. But in Saudi Arabia, we just got readings of fear, anxiety, dread, despair every time the ad played into our machines. So we thought the machines were wrong, which they are sometimes, but not in this case. So we called up the local Saudi client and said, look, we don't know what's going on. Something is not working. And he said, exactly, something is not working. We've been telling them, the sort of leadership team, all of this, there's something about this ad doesn't sit well. And we've spoken to lots and lots of focus groups, and they're like, it's all right, but no one can understand why it's not doing well. So we did the one thing that we don't often do, which is we peered into the training set that was triggering fear and anxiety. And what we discovered was, and now this is my story, because I have to explain the patterns in an understandable way, is we saw that all of the imagery that was historically tagged as anxiety and fear in a Saudi Arabian context that had built the model showed people in quiet situations, showed people isolated, showed people lonely, showed people alone. In a culture that is, in quotation marks, collectivist and loud and vibrant and bonded, being alone and being isolated and being in a completely silent environment is often a signifier of something dreadful, of a social removal of you from the world. So this was an experiment that we did, and then, and I will urge you to speak to Anurag about this later, is I was told, that's cute, why don't we do it on all the videos in the world? So the next video we want to show you is based on the training of about 4 million images, and we ran Cannes videos, so about 5 or 6 winning videos from the last film festival through this new and much more complicated artificial intelligence system to see the semiotics of some winning ads. So I would request them to play that now. Discussing this with some of our partners at agencies and clients, one of the best things that they said, because a lot of people say, oh, machines can never replace humans and machine-human part, all of that stuff. But one of the most revealing things that they told us was, this is the stuff that would take us a week to do and come up with these observations, and then we'd have a deadline and we'd have to deliver. But if we could get this in a couple of minutes, then the thinking that we could do on top of this would transform and accelerate the insights that we deliver to the clients. The last thing I want to speak to you about is the consumer. So I don't have my slide here, but I'll just talk about it. One of the interesting things about having to do a degree in a hotbed of radicals is you had to actually do field work. And historically, anthropological fieldwork has lasted 2, 3, 4, 5 years. In my case, I managed to get away with about a year and a half of being in the field with criminals. And one of the issues with any consumer inciting work that is taking place right now is because of market dynamics and market concerns, most people have about a day to conduct any meaningful immersion and ethnography. So the problem of scale historically amongst anthropologists was solved through time of immersion. So rather than spend a day with a person or meet 100 million people, I could spend a year with a person. Now, if you remember the original video we showed you, there's billions and billions of years of data being generated on the internet. So they used to solve the problem of scale via time of contact. Since we cannot do that now, because clients want answers quickly, we solve the problem of scale via scale. And any minute and any second of the time, multiple pieces of information about the consumer is being generated across platforms. So I'll leave you with one fun last example, which I did yesterday in the evening. And again, you can try this out outside. Is we found some Instagram. We went to Google and said popular Instagrammers in Singapore. We found 1 or 2 accounts. We threw them into the demo that we have outside, and it pulled out certain aesthetic traits, tribalism, sort of Victorian glamour, etc., etc. I don't even remember the names. But what we did then is we correlated and mapped our historical search data, which we're storing, of those phrases and objects and dresses around the same time that these people uploaded it. So if this young lady uploads a tribal print or has been uploading tribal prints for a week, then is it impacting search data or not? Is it impacting another young lady wanting to search for a tribal print in Lazada or wherever? And it's an interesting way to measure influence, because in some cases, yes, but in most cases, really, no. So that's what we have for you today. Just want to end by saying this is the early days of the internet. These are the early days of all AI modeling. But as qualitative researchers, I think it's imperative that you peer under the hood and see how much truth is actually out there. I'm here for the rest of the day for any questions, if needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, fantastic.